Hi, I'm Sarah Brzezinski, the Outreach Coordinator at the Chesapeake Biological Laboratory. Thank you for joining us for our Next Generation Student Interview Series. I'm going to be joined today by Christina, who is a former master's student and a current doctoral candidate at the Chesapeake Biological Laboratory. Hi, Christina, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Sarah. How are you?
I'm doing okay. So, Christina, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where are you from?
So I'm from a little bit of everywhere. I grew up in Pennsylvania and spent time in Indiana and California. And I did my undergraduate degree in Massachusetts before finding my way down to Maryland for graduate school.
And how did you find your way to Maryland and the Chesapeake Biological Laboratory?
So when I was a kid, I was really fortunate enough to travel with a program called Students on Ice to the Arctic, and I became really jazzed about it. And so when I went to college, I was paired up with a faculty member who I did work with, looking at the role of the Pacific walrus in the Arctic, kind of in society. And I stayed really excited about it. And one name in particular kept popping up, and that was Dr. Jackie Grebmeier. So originally, I really wanted to come to CBL because of her and my now committee member, Dr. Lee Cooper. And I ended up cold emailing her about graduate school and didn't initially hear back. We actually kind of joke about that to this day. I went back to school and told my advisor that I'd worked on that project with, that I was really excited about this. And he told me to come back at the end of my junior year, beginning of my senior year. And if I was still really excited about it, he'd put me in touch. He put me in touch with Jackie, and I heard back almost immediately from her, and we started talking. And so I came to CBL because of Jackie and Lee, but I stayed for a lot of reasons.
That's great. So that initial cold email and just kind of taking the initiative to reach out to someone about being a potential graduate student, is that something you would recommend for other students who are interested in pursuing advanced degrees?
Absolutely. I mean, the worst that's going to happen is they're not going to reply or they're going to say no. I've sent other cold emails that I've gotten immediate responses from. So it's always worth a shot. But so are using the connections that you've already started to develop in college and other avenues of your life.
So, Christina, when you got to the Chesapeake Biological Laboratory, what was your thesis research on?
So my master's research was looking at the effect of ocean acidification on clams. So with increasing greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, those are often absorbed into the water, and that can cause the pH of the water to decrease, which could potentially cause waters to become corrosive to things that build shells. So clams, snails, crabs. Species often react differently though. And so I looked at 3 different species of clams in the Arctic where lower pHs have been observed in the bottom waters. And it's interesting to look at in the Arctic because gases like carbon dioxide are more soluble. They're more likely to dissolve into the water in cold regions. And so the Arctic is really cold, and it's a good place to kind of look at these phenomenon. And so that was what my master's research was on. I traveled to the Arctic several times, collected live animals, and then conducted experiments in a cold room in Maryland at CBL that mimicked the conditions we would have seen.
And how has that evolved into a project that you're working on for your doctoral thesis?
So I'm actually, the people that know me know I'm kind of chemistry adverse actually. And so ocean acidification is a lot of chemistry. I can't really seem to avoid it, but I knew I really wanted to keep studying clams and I wanted to stay in the Arctic. I developed a really great relationship with my advisor and really loved working with her and learning from her. And so I approached her about staying for a PhD. And the focus is still clams. Kind of developed a soft spot for them. And so now I'm kind of looking at bigger population questions and how they've changed over the last 25 years. Jackie and Lee have data, and other groups, but Jackie and Lee have data in that region going back to the 70s and 80s. And so using this really great time series that they've built up to look at changes in the population as environmental factors are changing. So we could consider ocean acidification an environmental factor, but also looking at things like declining sea ice, warming water temperatures, food availability. So food for me is a really big driver in the system. And then to keep a little bit of kind of the chemistry and biology aspect, I look at these undisturbed sediment cores. So we send down a core that brings up a core that really helps us mimic the bottom. So it's an undisturbed selection of the bottom, and I measure oxygen rates in those cores. And in order to keep consistent with my love of clams, I also look at their individual respiration. So like, how does one clam breathe, and what percentage is that of the overall system? Clams are really important in this system. They're dominant in a lot of the areas, but they also are food for things like spectacled eiders, which is a diving sea duck, and then the walrus, which kind of took me back to my college days, which are really important in subsistence hunting for indigenous villages. So that's actually one of the things I really loved about working with Jackie and Lee and staying in this program, is that they really try to look at this like kind of full ecosystem perspective.
So these clams that you're working with, as you were saying, they are an important food source for a bunch of different species in the Arctic. So in terms of climate change, why should someone who isn't a scientist care about climate change that's happening in the Arctic?
So this is always one of my favorite questions, and it's sometimes hard to get people excited about a place that's so far away. But I kind of equate it to the Bay. So here in the Bay, we have this culture of watermen and oysters, and so much of our society is built behind that. We have, cultural relevance. We have, what's the word I'm looking for? Parties to celebrate these, not parties. What's the festivals and the, crab festival, oyster fest. We have things that celebrate it, and it's a really important part of our culture. Well, that's the same for these villages in Alaska. It's their life. They use the ocean as a food source, and as these things change, their way of life is likely to change. And so you can equate, in my mind, a subsistence hunter in Alaska dealing with climate change to the same way you can equate to a waterman in the Chesapeake Bay dealing with with climate change. And so kind of almost holistically, as a human race or human group of people, we share a lot of similar stories despite being in very different locations.
So Christina, what is something that is particularly interesting about your research?
So a lot of people kind of, maybe I find this exciting, I think it's fun. A lot of people think clams are kind of these boring sedentary animals that like don't really do a lot. I actually work with a cockle species, so a really big species of clam that has a giant foot, which is the part of the clam that we eat. They move a lot. I've had several of them fall off of lab benches. I've set them down on the lab bench to measure them, and they'll start moving their foot, and they fall off. And they also really do, we kind of think we say clams as a whole, but I mentioned in ocean acidification research, it's very species specific in how these things respond. The same is true for the respiration. Some of these big species of clams really suck down oxygen or breathe in really fast, and other ones they're real slow. They kind of got their own way of doing things. I don't know, that always strikes me because everyone's always like, they're so boring, they just sit there. And I'm like, well, but they don't just sit there, they do move. They're actually quite active. So I always think that's kind of fun to show people. I don't know why that sticks out for me, but it does.
And where do you hope that your career will take you after you graduate?
This is always the hardest question to answer. That's been one of the most exciting things I've been doing during my PhD. I feel like it's really allowed me to figure out what I like, but also what I don't like. And so for me, I have found that I love being in the field. I enjoy working in the lab. I don't know that I'd say love, but I do love kind of the hands-on part of it. But I've also been fortunate enough to have some teaching experience, and I really, really love working with students. And so I've been lucky enough to work with students individually on senior thesis projects. And this semester, I've been lucky enough to teach a class at St. Mary's College. And so I see myself staying in an academic field because I like the research and I like working with students.
It's wonderful that you're getting some experience mentoring students and teaching while you're still pursuing your degree. If say some of your students now were to express an interest in graduate school, what advice would you give them?
So, like I said earlier, send those cold emails. You never know what's going to come from them. Keep those emails fairly short. These people are getting bombarded, but, send them, do your homework on the person, know what they're studying, know what projects they've got going on, and know how you can contribute to that lab. But kind of try to keep that, within a couple sentences and attach your CV, tell them who you are and what you're doing and what you've done, and really look at the people. And so you're applying to work with a person more so than the program. You've got to be happy with what you're doing, and the project. It's a lot more fun and rewarding when you're excited about it. And on that front, when you're looking at schools, talk to your potential advisors, students, and technicians, and the people that work for them. They will tell you what it's like to work for those people. And so, get a feel for what the rest of the lab is like as well.
That's great advice. So Christina, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. It was great catching up.
Absolutely, this was wonderful, and I hope I hope it was helpful. And I really enjoy talking about this stuff. So this has been lovely.
Well, you have a real passion for it, and it's great to be able to see you get to pursue that passion. So thank you, Christina, and thank you everyone for joining us.